The auction yard sat at the edge of town like a moral blind spot, a place folks pretended not to see even as they drifted toward it when curiosity or cruelty outweighed decency. The ground was churned to powder by boots and hooves, and the air carried the sour tang of sweat, tobacco, and old canvas. Caleb Rourke stood among the men with his hat pulled low, the brim shading eyes that had seen too much sun and not enough mercy. He hadn't planned to be there. He'd ridden in for a mule, nothing more than a stubborn animal to pull fence posts on the north pasture. He told himself that again as the auctioneer's voice rose and fell like a saw cutting through wood. Items moved fast: tools, saddles, a wagon with a cracked axle. Laughter followed low bids, groans followed high ones. Then the rhythm faltered. A pause crept in, uncomfortable and mean, like a held breath before a blow. Caleb felt it before he understood it, the way men shifted, the way eyes turned sharp. She stood on the platform with her chin level and her hands bound loosely in front of her, as if the rope were more for show than for keeping her there. Her dress was plain, dust-stained at the hem, mended at the elbow. She looked neither small nor meek. That, Caleb realized, was the problem. The auctioneer cleared his throat, tried to make his voice sound routine, but it wobbled. "Next," he said, and didn't say what she was next for. The bids came hesitant at first, then uglier. Men called numbers like they were tossing stones. Each one landed somewhere on her, chipped at the quiet resolve in her eyes. Caleb's fingers curled around the folded bills in his pocket. He told himself to look away. He told himself this wasn't his business. He told himself the town had rules and he had fences to mend. Then she spoke. "You paid for me," she said, voice clear enough to slice through the murmurs. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Now do it." The yard went still. Even the horses seemed to pause, ears flicking. The words weren't an invitation. They were a dare, flung like a gauntlet at the feet of every man watching. The meaning sat there, heavy and obvious, the thing nobody named but everyone understood. Caleb felt heat rise in his chest, a mix of anger and something like shame that burned worse. He looked up without meaning to and met her eyes. They were a steady gray, the color of storm clouds that had decided whether to break. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't begging. She was calling the lie what it was. A man behind Caleb snorted. Another chuckled. The auctioneer shifted his feet and glanced at the ledger as if the ink might rescue him. The bidding stumbled. A number was called. Another answered it. The sound of it all made Caleb's stomach turn. He raised his hand. The auctioneer latched onto it with relief. "I've got." He named the amount, louder than necessary, like volume could make it right. Someone tried to outbid him. Caleb didn't look away from her when he answered. He raised again, higher than he'd planned, higher than the mule was worth, higher than he could easily spare. The yard murmured. The other bidder hesitated, cursed under his breath, and fell silent. "Sold," the auctioneer said quickly, banging the gavel like he wanted the moment done. The sound echoed too long. The money changed hands. The rope slackened at her wrists. The men drifted away, disappointed, muttering about luck and waste. Caleb felt their eyes on his back as he turned, felt the shape of a story forming behind him that he wanted no part of. She stepped down from the platform and followed him without being told. Her boots were worn, soles thin. She moved like someone who had learned not to flinch. They passed the corral, the hitching posts, the sagging fence where posters peeled in the sun. Caleb stopped near the edge of the yard, where the noise thinned and the road stretched out in two dusty directions. He took off his hat and ran a hand through hair gone more gray than brown these days. "What's your name?" he asked, and was surprised at how rough his voice sounded. She watched his hands, his face, weighing him the way men weighed horses. "Maeve," she said at last. "Maeve," he repeated. The name fit her better than anything the town had decided. "You don't owe me what they think you owe me." A humorless smile tugged at her mouth. "That's not how this works. It is today," he said, and hoped he was right. She crossed her arms, the rope still dangling loose from her wrists. "Men don't pay good money to make speeches." "I didn't pay for that," he said. "I paid to stop them." "And then what?" she asked. "You expect me to vanish?" Caleb glanced back at the yard. The auctioneer was already busy again, the ledger swallowing the moment whole. "No," he said, "I expect you to live." She barked a laugh, sharp and sudden. You make it sound simple. It isn't, he admitted. But it's something. The wind kicked up, carrying dust between them. Maeve followed his gaze to the road. The town lay one way, its windows watching even now, its judgments already sharpening. The other way led out, toward open land and fewer rules, but also fewer promises. She stood very still, and Caleb realized she was calculating, not escape routes, but costs. You bought me, she said quietly. Paper says so. The law likes paper, he said. But it also likes arrangements. Her eyes narrowed. What arrangement? I've got a ranch north of the cottonwoods, he said. It's quiet, needs work, needs a hand that doesn't scare easy. And the town? She asked. They'll tell themselves whatever lets them sleep, he said. We don't have to help. Maeve studied him a long moment. She looked at his boots, scuffed and honest. His hands, calloused. His face, lined but open. You offering charity? She asked. No, he said. I'm offering work, pay, a place that doesn't ask questions it doesn't need answered. She breathed out slowly. And if I say no? Then I'll walk you to the edge of town, he said. And you'll choose your road. The rope slipped from her wrists. She didn't rub them. She didn't look away. You know what they'll say about you. I've been a lot of things, he said. Never cared much for their lists. Maeve nodded once, the smallest motion. All right, rancher, she said. Let's see what kind of man buys trouble and calls it mercy. They walked together to his horse. He handed her a canteen. She drank without asking, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. The saddle creaked as she mounted behind him, light as a shadow. As they rode out, Caleb felt the weight of the town lift and replace itself with something heavier and truer, the knowledge that he had crossed a line and would not step back. Behind them, the auction yard returned to its business. Ahead, the road opened. And between those two truths rode a rancher and a woman who had refused to bow, carrying a choice that would change them both. The ranch lay beyond the cottonwoods where the land widened and the air seemed to loosen its grip. Caleb rode with a steady hand, aware of Maeve behind him, her balance sure, her presence quiet but undeniable. When they reached the gate, he dismounted and opened it, the hinges groaning like they were waking from a long sleep. The house sat low and plain against the sky, wood-weathered silver, porch boards smoothed by years of boots. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and that counted for something. Maeve slid down from the saddle and took it in without comment. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked, as if cataloging a future that had arrived. Without asking permission, Caleb showed her the pump, the barn, the bunkhouse that hadn't been used since his last hired hand rode off chasing gold that didn't want to be found. He talked too much at first, filling the space with practical details, where the tools hung, how the well behaved in drought, which horse would test you and which would forgive mistakes. Maeve listened, nodded, asked questions that cut straight to what mattered. Work began the next morning. It always did. Fences needed mending where winter storms had leaned too hard. A calf had slipped through a gap and learned bad habits. Maeve took to it like she'd been waiting for the chance to prove something to herself. She worked without complaint, learned the lay of the land with a careful eye, and met the ranch's silences with a steady patience. Caleb noticed the way she hummed under her breath when she concentrated, how she squared her shoulders when a task turned stubborn. He noticed, too, that she kept her distance at first, sleeping in the bunkhouse, keeping her words spare. The town came calling the way it always did, slowly, with plausible reasons. A neighbor stopped by to borrow a wrench and lingered too long, eyes flicking to Maeve and away again. The preacher rode up one afternoon, hat in hand, concern folded neatly into his smile. He spoke of propriety, of paperwork, of how arrangements could smooth rough waters. Caleb listened, polite but unmoved. Maeve stood nearby, arms crossed, daring anyone to decide for her again. At night, the stars crowded close, bright and cold. They ate on the porch sometimes, the quiet settling around them like a blanket. Conversations grew longer, then easier. Maeve told him where she'd learned to work, the places she'd passed through that taught her not to trust promises that came too quickly. Caleb told her about the ranch, how it had been his father's and his father's before that, how keeping it whole felt like keeping a vow. They laughed once, startled by the sound, and the laughter changed something neither of them named. The whispers grew louder in town. Stories sharpened. One morning, Caleb found a note nailed to the fence, words cut deep and crooked. He pulled it down before Maeve could see it, burned it in the stove, and went back to work. She noticed anyway. She always noticed. That night, she stood on the porch with him, the wind tugging at her hair. "You can send me on," she said quietly. "You've done enough." Caleb shook his head. "This isn't about them." She studied his face, searching for the catch. "Then what is it about?" He took a breath, felt the weight of it. "About choosing what's right even when it costs." She nodded slowly. "I won't be anyone's burden." "You're not," he said. "You're my partner in work." The law arrived dressed as necessity. A clerk rode out with papers and a practiced neutrality, explaining how things stood, how ambiguity invited trouble. Maeve listened, jaw set. When the man left, dust trailing behind him, the quiet felt different, charged, expectant. That evening, as the sun sank and painted the hills in copper, Caleb cleared his throat. He wasn't good at speeches. He'd learned to let fences and seasons do the talking. "Maeve," he said, standing awkwardly by the rail. "This place needs a name beside mine. The law would leave us be." She turned, eyes narrowing, not unkindly. "You're asking me to marry you." "I am," he said simply. Silence stretched. Crickets tuned their instruments. Maeve walked the length of the porch, boots soft on the boards. "You're offering me safety," she said at last. "And yourself." "I'm offering a life," he said. "Shared." She faced him, the last light catching in her hair. "You know what they'll say." "They'll say it anyway," he replied. "Let them be wrong." She laughed, a sound edged with disbelief and something like relief. "You don't make it easy to refuse." "Good," he said, and smiled. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the strength there. "Then do it," she said, not as a challenge now, but as a vow. "Do it right." They married on a morning that dawned clear and cool. The preacher came back, this time with a softer smile. A neighbor stood witness, then another. The words were spoken plain, the promises unadorned. When the ink dried, the law retreated, satisfied. The town watched from a distance, uncertain what to make of a story that refused to follow its script. Life settled into a new shape. Maeve moved into the house, bringing little but changing much. Curtains appeared at the windows. The table grew crowded with plans. Work was shared, decisions debated, laughter earned. The ranch thrived not because it was tamed, but because it was respected. On a night thick with stars, they stood together on the porch, the land breathing around them. Caleb took Maeve's hand, feeling the truth of it, solid and warm. She leaned into him, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt less like a burden and more like a road they'd chosen, together.